Hi everybody, this is Mike Curley from the C Team. In this set of videos, I'm going to give you guys a kind of a rundown of the Dresden Files RPG. It's one of my favorite RPGs, it runs on the Fate system, and I've been GMing it on and off for about 10 years. Now in that time, I've noticed that especially new players have had trouble kind of coming to grips with how the system works, especially if they have experience with other systems like D20 systems or Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder. Now, the foundation of the system is aspects, which are kind of character-defining phrases that each character or item or location has. And they can be any number of things. They can be a relationship, like so-and-so's boyfriend or so-and-so's brother. They can apply to religious beliefs or other beliefs, like I'm a humanist, I'm a futurist, I'm devoutly Christian, I'm a Baptist, I'm Jewish, etc. They can be catchphrases that the character is well known for, like if you were building Captain America, I can do this all day would be a catchphrase. If you were building John McClane, yippee-ki-yay, etc., etc. They can also just be a physical description if that is a thing that really helps define the character. Like if you had a character who was so big he had to duck and turn sideways to get through a door. That would be an interesting aspect. Or they can apply to items they have, like he's always wearing that hat, or he's never seen without his coin. If you were building someone like Two-Face, that would be a good aspect. In general, they help flesh out and define a character, item, location, or situation. They don't have to be detailed, and in fact, you usually want them at most 5 to 10 words. But it's better if the phrasing is interesting and unique to the character. Say you were building a barroom brawler. Sure, you could give him the aspect, he likes to fight, which tells you he likes to fight but doesn't tell you anything else about him. A better aspect might be, he looks like he gets his nose broken for a living. And that gives you more of a description of the characters, not just that they like to fight, also tells you what they look like, kind of, and also a little bit about their disposition. Alright, now characters typically have 7 aspects. I'm going to give a very brief outline now. I'm going to have another video more about character creation, but this will give you kind of a baseline. Their first, most important aspect is their high concept, which is kind of your elevator pitch for a character. You go to your GM and you say, I want to play a Valkyrie who's working for a mob boss, or a blind wizard private eye, or, oh, my guy is an ex-cop who's a werewolf. It's kind of sum up your character in 3 to 5 words. Now there's 5 additional aspects that relate to kind of who the character is, where they came from, what shaped them, what their early adventures were about, and even what other characters they ran into. And finally, there's their trouble. Now this is almost exclusively a negative aspect in that it's not something you're going to be able to use to your advantage for the most part. It's something that complicates the character's life. Now that doesn't mean it has to be a flaw, although it could. It could be that your flaw is you go into a blind rage or you're an alcoholic. It could also be an outside influence, like you have family obligations that pop up at the worst time. You know, you have a family reunion when you have to go fight vampires. It could also be a virtue. If you never back down from injustice, that could get you in trouble if you pick a fight you can't win. Whatever it is, it's something that makes the character's life difficult. And you want to talk to your GM about how you work that in. Okay, something else I mentioned earlier, again, items and locations also have aspects. Now, your character might be a mechanic, say. You might have a torque wrench that's your father's torque wrench. So that's something that tells you a bit of a story about that item. Or if you were playing a Star Wars setting, a good aspect for the Millennium Falcon would be, she may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid. It's something that tells you something about that item and location. Now, I've mostly talked thus far about permanent aspects, things that are a character trait or part of an item. There are also temporary aspects, and these are things like if you're in the middle of a fight, if you trip somebody, that's a temporary aspect. It's basically you perform a maneuver that creates a temporary change to a person, place, or situation, and you usually do it for some kind of advantage. You flick the lights on and off to blind characters that had been in darkness. They could be tripping, disarming, blinding, you hit a fire extinguisher. If you ever watched a Jackie Chan movie, any of his fights, he's doing maneuver after maneuver. He's tripping people up, he's tying them up, he's throwing dust into the air, anything to create a temporary advantage that he could then capitalize when he goes to make his move. Now there's other ways to introduce an aspect. One way is to discover an aspect. Now this is something that maybe your GM already had in mind that you hadn't figured out yet, or something else that just makes sense. They can be determined through things like assessment roles, like using the investigation, lore, or scholarship skills, or even trappings of some skills like guns, weapons, or craftsmanship. You could discover an aspect of, oh, that sword is in bad shape, and then tag that for an advantage later. And you can also just guess. There are certain monsters that, if you've ever read Bram Stoker's Dracula, you know what a vampire is. So if the monster's coming at you with big fangs, talking about sucking your blood, you are totally free to say, I'm guessing he's a vampire, so I'm going to pull out a cross or a holy symbol and get it to back off. Now the other thing you can do is declare an aspect. And this is where you, as a player, add something to a scene. You decide that you want something in the scene, and maybe it's something the GM hasn't thought of, or something the GM just hasn't described yet, but you can use that to your advantage. Now, usually there's a few ways of doing this, and the more sense it makes, generally speaking, the less you have to do to declare it. Now, certain things you will need no roll or nothing to sell your GM on. Like, say, if you're fighting in a workshop, you can easily declare, oh, there's a saw over there that I can use as a weapon. Let me tag that for a bonus. Sometimes you do need a roll. If you were, say, fighting a ghoul in someone else's apartment, you might have to roll investigation to declare, oh, I found his gun under the bed, so I can defend myself. Now, some things are harder. They might need a high roll, or they might need a fate point. Things like declaring that the police show up and scare the monsters off. That might be a little more far-fetched. But you might have to spend a fate point to declare, oh, the fight's been really loud, someone called the cops. Those are usually things that are really far-fetched, or not really far-fetched, but enough that it's going to change the scene in a way that takes some stretching. And of course, the GM is totally in his power to say, like, no, that doesn't work. Like, if you were fighting in Hoboken, you couldn't just declare, oh, this is the Pope's house, so the lawn is going to kill the vampires. That's just way out of the realm of a declaration. So now you have something of a baseline for what aspects are. So how do you use them as a player? Generally, there's three ways. One, you can get a +2 on any roll. Provided that the aspect makes sense for the roll, you can just boost it. If you needed a 3 to get over that hill, and you rolled a 1, but you have an aspect that you're an athlete of some kind, yeah, go ahead, invoke it, spend a fate point, and get over the hill. You can also invoke for a reroll, which means you reroll every die in the exchange. That includes yours and your opponent's, so there's a little more risk there. Or you can invoke for effect. This is similar to a declaration where you invoke it for something different that also makes sense. So, for instance, if you had thrown salt in somebody's eye, you can invoke that for effect. Instead of a plus, minus, whatever, you can invoke to say, oh, he can't see me, so he can't shoot at me. Something along those lines. Now, I've been using the word invoke versus tagging. There's two different ways to use an aspect. The one that pops up most frequently is tagging, and that's where you use a new aspect once for free that you or your ally has either created or discovered. Now that means, say, if you're in a fight and your wizard in the party used some magic to create ice on the floor. Your turn is up next. You can tag that aspect that he created to get a +2 on your attack roll. And there's no fate points exchanged, and that's kind of the most common way where you rack up a bunch of temporary aspects and then you use them for some kind of bonus. Now, invoking is an aspect that's already been created and already known, and you spend a fate point to use that to your advantage. Now, that's something that this is what you usually use on your own aspects. You would spend a fate point to invoke, I'm a former Golden Glove, to dodge out of the way of an enemy's attack, or something like that. Now, you have to note, if you spend a fate point invoking an aspect against someone, they get the fate point because you're using it against them. And that goes the other way too. If the GM spends a fate point to put you at a disadvantage, you get that fate point. So it's kind of a back and forth currency. Now, I've mentioned fate points a few times, so you're probably wondering, how do you get fate points? And the main way is through compels, which again, work through aspects. A compel is where the GM says, okay, this aspect is going to create a complication of some kind. I'm going to offer you a fate point. If you take it, here's the complication. Now, a player can buy out of it, spending a fate point they already have, so there's sort of a 2-point swing. Either you take the fate point and end up at +1 with the complication, or you buy out of it. Now, a player can also self-compel if they have an idea, they want a fate point, and they want to make things interesting. They can say, oh, my trouble applies here. I've got ludicrous rage. So I'm going to self-compel that I'm going to punch this guy that we need to talk to. And the GM decides whether that's valid or not and hands over a fate point. They could be, again, character aspects, temporary aspects, or scene aspects. And it's another thing that's going to vary from situation to situation. And that's basically it for how aspects work. There are some more nuanced things that kind of evolve themselves through play, but the bottom line is be creative with both what your aspects are, how you create them, and how you use them. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative, and look forward to the next one.